Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. The Road to Autonomy is brought to you in part by Stantec Generation AV. Stantec Generation AV combines some of the most experienced AV experts in the industry with the resources of a global engineering firm. Stantec Generation AV provides education, consulting, assessment, and guidance to any industry interested in autonomous vehicles. Learn more at stantec.com. Hello and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Don Burnette, co-founder and CEO of Kodiak Robotics. Welcome to the podcast, Don.
Thanks, Grayson. It's great to be here.
I'm super excited to have you here. You've got this really cool thing going on social media with truck hats around the world, and I'm very happy. You've sent me one of the hats. I put it on a surfboard, so I can't wait to see where the hats show up next because you have a great team of folks doing really great things.
Absolutely. It's great to see you participating. We do love our hats, and we do like to take pictures from all of the travels, and we encourage people to bring their Kodiak hats with them everywhere they go.
It's a really smart. There was a grocery store in Connecticut still there called Stu Leonard's, and they would do these things called bags around the world. And individuals would go all around the world, and they would bring the Stu Leonard's bag and take a photo. I brought the bag to Mount Rushmore as a kid, and if you brought the photo in, you got a free ice cream. So if we bring the photo to you, do we get a ride in the Kodiak truck?
I think we can probably work something out.
All right, you got a deal. Don, you started your career at Google in the early days working on the self-driving car project. What was that like during those early foundational days?
So, as you said, I was one of the early members of the self-driving car team at Google. Before that, I was actually working on self-driving cars at Carnegie Mellon, and I got the opportunity to come out here to California. The early days were really an exciting time for those of us who were aware of the self-driving industry, which is very few folks at the time. A lot of the work that we were doing was focused more from a research perspective. So we were just trying to push the tech as far as we could in any direction, just to see what is possible, what are we capable of. We weren't so much worried about what is the commercial use case, who is the user, how are they going to use it, where are they going to use it, when are they going to use it. It was much more about just the technology itself. And eventually, after many years gone by, we started to ask logical questions. Where is this technology going? Who's going to use it? And how are they going to use it? And so I was there for about 5 years working on then the robotaxi problem, which of course is where most of the early industry ended up focusing. But ultimately, I thought there were some very obvious technical challenges and business case challenges, to be quite frank, for the robotaxi use case. Urban environments in particular are extremely difficult to navigate for humans in particular, especially for folks who are familiar with the driving conditions in dense urban environments like San Francisco or New York City. And if you want to run a business of ride hailing or taxi driving or robotaxis, then you need to do it in an area where there's actually demand for that type of service. And so those types of environments typically are the most challenging to drive. And so it's hard to combine that urban driving business case with the actual technical challenges that you need to overcome in order to make it successful.
I fully agree with you. During that time, were there talks about the business model, or is it still a research project? Like, we're going to figure this out, research. Oh, the business will come later.
It was an evolving conversation, I would say. I mean, there's always the kind of water cooler chat about where are we going? What are the dreams of this technology? What problems can it solve? And so even from the very beginning, we were talking about different commercial use cases, but the technology was so much in its infancy that it was sort of hard for anyone to really recognize what those applications would be at the time. And so we tended not to talk so seriously about it in the beginning. And then I would say as the second and third year of the program set in, that's when we started to think about these use cases and actually try to envision what a service would like. We started to hire product folks and do market research and start to learn about the taxi business and the ride sharing business and those types of things. We also thought about trucking in the very early days. It was dismissed fairly early on, not because of technical reasons, just because at the time we all envisioned this as a very sexy technology. The leadership at Google was really focused on personal mobility. They wanted people to be able to touch and interact with the technology in a very direct way. And so robotaxis was the obvious direction for us to try to head.
Interesting that trucking was thought and dismissed and there was the focus on robotaxis. Now we're seeing this giant shift in the industry where trucking's the sexy application. Everybody's trying to figure out trucking. When you're sitting there having these conversations around the business case challenges, is that when in your mind you say, wait a second, there's a real financial opportunity here with trucking? Is that when you started to really think about trucking just based on the economics of the business case?
For me, I started out as a technologist, as a researcher. I didn't see myself as an entrepreneur. I didn't think too much about the business aspects of the technology. That changed gradually over time as I recognized that ultimately you can't just run a research lab forever. Or at least if you do that, you're never going to be successful. Or that was my observation. And so I became more and more interested in how to make the technology real, recognizing that we were hitting roadblocks, for lack of a better way to describe it, no pun intended. With the technology on the robotaxi side, I started to think about a broader set of opportunities. And for me, I was a technical lead on the software side, working directly on the technology. I focused on motion planning. I studied questions like, what does it mean to drive like a human? It's one thing to get a robot to drive like a robot, but how do you make a robot drive like a human? What even does it mean to drive like a human? How do you quantify such a concept? I spent years studying this idea that is actually incredibly important if you're going to be successful in robotaxis. So I was down deep in the code. I was down deep in the challenges, trying to solve them on a day in and day out basis. And when Google's leadership and others at the time, Cruise and Uber ATG was around, everybody was charging hard and fast at this dense urban driving mobility application. I just recognized it for what it was. I thought that the technology just wasn't there, just plain and simple. And then as I started to look for a technologically feasible application, that's also when I really started to focus on the business aspect. And it turns out that in robotaxis, it's a nice to have, right? If you're in San Francisco or New York City today, you can call a cab, you can hail an Uber, hail a Lyft, there's other services, and somebody will show up and pick you up from point A and take you to point B, and it'll cost you some amount of dollars. It would be really cool. I would be super giddy to be able to be picked up in a self-driving vehicle with no driver and taken across town. But at the end of the day, the outcome is the same, right? So I would say it's a nice to have. It's not really a need. But when you look at the trucking space, there's a tremendous need for autonomy. There's a lack of drivers. It's pretty well understood that there's a massive driver shortage. The freight volume is increasing. The demand to move goods is ever increasing. And so you have this gap that actually can be solved, I think, fairly uniquely with autonomy. When you pair that with a much more structured environment that I believe is ultimately easier, though not easy, easier to solve, that's when kind of a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, hey, the industry should be focused on this trucking problem. And I found myself fairly out on the fringes with that notion back in 2015. And so that's when I really started to develop this opinion that trucking was the way to go. And I tried to convince a bunch of people and nobody really wanted to listen. So that's ultimately why I left Google and started Otto.
Was it your honest assessment of the technology from being in the code and understanding the capabilities of the tech that ultimately led you to founding Kodiak Robotics in 2018?
Ultimately, I mean, it was definitely a journey to get to Kodiak Robotics. Of course, I co-founded Otto. Otto was a really exciting project. I loved the people. I loved the team that I worked with. We made a lot of rapid progress. We ended up getting acquired by Uber, joined forces with the then existing Uber ATG, worked very closely with the team out in Pittsburgh. But I found that in my time at Uber, more convinced than ever that trucking was the right problem to solve. And when the Uber team and the leadership at Uber decided to focus their efforts more, again, toward the robotaxi side, that's ultimately when I decided this really isn't for me. I'm going to spend my time working on this technology. I want it to be in an area where I really see a direct application. We always joke within the self-driving space that none of us have ever shipped a product. When you're an engineer and you work on something for 10 years or more and you don't ship anything, it starts to wear on you. And that was really the premise of starting Kodiak. I wanted to start a company with really experienced people, folks who had all kinds of experience from within the industry, coming from robotaxis, and really focus on a specific narrow problem within the self-driving space and get to a point where we could actually ship a product. That was the goal from day one. It remains the goal today.
Funny thing on auto, I cold called you guys every week when I was the co-chair of the Autonomous Vehicle Task Force City Beverly Hills because we were trying to convert the dump trucks. And I would call you guys every week saying, I know you're folks on trucking, but we got these dump trucks and they're still a truck and we'd like to automate them. And you were very, very kind during those days. Looking at the autonomous trucking industry or the autonomous vehicle industry as a whole today, do you feel that the industry as a whole is coming around to the reality of the business model for shipping a product, that trucking is a product that can become a reality today and generate meaningful and eventually significant revenue?
Well, when you look around the space and you just look at the landscape and how it's changing, you see that, I'll call it traditional players. I'm using air quotes, even though people can't see me. The traditional, more established players who have focused on this robotaxi problem for a very long time are now pivoting toward trucking. And I think that they have come to realize that it's not that you can't create a robotaxi successfully. Google has launched a pilot program out in Chandler, Arizona. It's a massive success for the industry as a whole. I'm super proud of the work that I did in contributing to that launch. But the fact remains that you can't build a business in Chandler, Arizona around that concept. You have to go to places like San Francisco. You have to go to places like New York City. And it's the combination of the technical challenge combined with the commercial viability that I think is pushing other programs toward trucking. That's really what you're seeing across the board now. And I think it's great for me. It's great for Kodiak. It feels a long time coming, validation, vindication, if you will, that I and a handful of others were right much before most people were even thinking about this problem.
You were definitely on the right track. You were 2 and 3 steps ahead of other individuals that were focused on robo. And I want to touch on the Chandler, Arizona point because, earlier in those days, I reached out to the Waymo team and I said, why are you not picking up at airports? Why are you not taking individuals to and from hotels in Scottsdale? There's a business there. That's not what we're focused on. I was like, but there's a business there. That's not what we're focused on. And it was a complete missed opportunity. But boy, oh boy, you did not miss the opportunity on trucking. Looking at the autonomous trucking market today, what do you see? And are you seeing any new trends that says, wait a second, Kodiak's going to be 2 and 3 steps ahead again of our competition?
Yeah. One thing I think is clear now is that as an industry, we're at a pivotal moment. It's no longer a question of will self-driving technology happen? It's really about when it's going to happen. Really, we've taken the tech, autonomous trucking specifically, out of the research project phase. And the technology is really now in the validation stage. And so when you look across different players in the space, when you look at the capabilities of these systems, I really can only speak for Kodiak at the very least, but these trucks on the road are incredibly capable now. They're driving hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles at a time. And they're really able to handle just about everything that the highway environment can throw at them. And you're starting to see a lot of partnerships on a lot of investments being made in the trucking space. And I think that's a sign that the market is really ready to adopt the technology, because it's not enough to just build the technology and hope somebody wants it. You have to convince the existing market. And we are slotting into an existing market, right? We're not really disrupting, in a sense, the way the market operates. Self-driving has to slot into the existing market, but you're seeing that market really embrace it in a way that is unprecedented up until today. And so that's really exciting. One measure of an autonomous vehicle program and the progress that they're making is something that we refer to as policy disengages. These are situations that the system can't handle. And so you instruct your drivers to disengage. And at Kodiak, we no longer have policy disengages. There are no situations that we tell our drivers, hey, if this is the situation up ahead, just disengage. We know the system can't handle it. Our expectation is that the Kodiak driver can handle everything that the road can throw at it. And I think moving to that stage as a company, moving to that stage as an industry is really a turning point. And that's really where it becomes real. Now it's about validating the redundancies within the system, hardening the hardware, integrating into the platform in a kind of, as we say, automotive grade way. That's really what remains. And I think in the next several years, you're going to see self-driving trucks actually capable of driving out there in real conditions without a safety driver.
It's a big milestone. Looking at the market, in my opinion, you're shoring up a growing market. E-commerce is going bonkers. Everything is bought online. If you look at the restoration hardware numbers or the Wayfair numbers, more and more furniture is being sold online. And as your general counsel, who's a wonderful friend, Jordan Coleman, says, if you bought it, it came on a truck. And that's a huge growth opportunity for you. If you look at growth opportunities, Wall Street's beginning to pick up on the financial upside. Analysts recently went around and toured yourself and several of your competitors. What are your thoughts that these big Wall Street analysts from the big banks are coming out and saying, hey, Don, we're interested in this technology? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the expression is, if you bought it, a truck brought it. So it's got a nice little play on words there. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to see the reaction of Wall Street, the public markets. That was a big question for a long time in most of our minds. Yeah, it's okay. We're tinkering in a garage. We're researchers. Nobody's really paying attention to us. How are we going to commercialize this technology? How are we actually going to make it a success? What would happen if we were a public entity? I'm kind of speaking in generics for the industry. These are questions that we've had for the last 14 plus years. And now we're seeing it unfold. 2021 is a really exciting year in the evolution of self-driving. And I think we'll look back at 2021 as a real turning point. Wall Street, along with most of the AV industry, has finally realized that the strong business case for autonomous trucks has been defined. It's really about autonomy on repeatable routes. It's about finding the really dense corridors, which are inefficient to move with human drivers, but can't quite be handled with rail. And just recently, there was an analyst tour where folks went around to all the different players. I think it was a really strong indicator that the industry recognizes the economic impacts of autonomous trucks and the value that it's going to bring to the global supply chain. The analyst tour, I think, went really well. There were a lot of great demos, and we personally received a lot of positive feedback. JP Morgan said, there was a quote that I read, that over the last 3 weeks, we met with management teams of 6 autonomous trucking companies, Locomation, Embark, Kodiak Plus, Aurora, and Too Simple, and they took a test drive in each one of these vehicles. And we were really delighted to be a part, obviously, of the tour. And the quote later goes on to say, and we thought Kodiak and Embark demoed the widest range of capabilities. So that was a huge validation for Kodiak and everything that we've been working toward in the last 3.5 years to be put at the top of the list by the analysts, in their opinion, I think speaks volumes to the work that we've been doing. And it's really great to see the industry, the street, the public investor group validating this technology and really acknowledging that it's here and it's coming and that they need to play a role in it.
It further validates your Houston to Dallas run that you're doing disengagement free. And that's just further validation for that run.
Yeah, absolutely. So we announced back in January that our system has gotten to the point where we can actually deliver real commercial freight moving between Dallas and Houston and back, completely disengagement free. So that means without a safety driver having to touch the wheel. And we're doing this regularly. And, Even one day we had back-to-back trips. So that was a distance of over 800 miles in a single day without a single driver intervention whatsoever. And I want to stress that often you see these really nice, high quality videos that folks put out with a lot of production value, and they show a self-driving truck on the road and it's kind of making lane changes or whatnot. Our announcement was really focused on true commercial deliveries. What that means is that there's a prescribed pickup time, there's a prescribed drop-off time. You don't get to cherry pick the time of day. You don't get to avoid rush hour traffic. You don't get to avoid construction. You have to handle everything that the highway throws at you. And being able to handle it in those conditions, and we're doing that, by the way, in inclement weather, we're doing it rain or shine. We're also doing it day and night. So our performance in the nighttime is just as solid as our performance in the daytime. And I think all of this just really shows that the technology for handling highway driving is actually already here. And the deployment of these AV trucks is coming a lot sooner than you think.
The deployment's coming sooner than you think. And you have a wonderful team focused on policy. We need autonomous trucks. If this technology fails, our supply chain's going to collapse. And to me, we're in the perfect storm where the supply chain is breaking at the seams. And here comes this incredible technology, autonomous trucking, that will help shore up the supply chain, because down the supply chain, if a mother or a father can get a cereal for 10 cents cheaper or toilet paper for $1 cheaper, that's going to have a major economic impact. And autonomous trucking is going to have that positive impact on society. So you're doing good by society. You're generating revenue for your shareholders. Looking at the landscape, your competitors are going public. Why have you opted to stay private?
Well, if you look around the industry, you will notice that now Kodiak is the only private autonomous trucking company that has made significant progress. And that creates a somewhat unique opportunity. And obviously the SPAC market is quite the buzz of late. There's a massive push over the last 2 years for companies like Kodiak and others to go through that public process. It's a good opportunity to raise capital, but it does come with its cons. And for small, very low revenue companies, completely unprofitable companies, to start going public with no product and a very nebulous roadmap to get there, I think it creates a lot of uncertainty and risk. So we're definitely always evaluating our options and trying to position Kodiak in the best possible way to achieve our goals. And of course, we have been having conversations in and around SPAC opportunities. We've, of course, been watching the Too Simple IPO very closely. I think it's great to see Too Simple succeed in that route, right? It validates that path is possible at the very least, which is great for them, but it's also great for the industry as a whole. So these are opportunities that we are always evaluating. Nothing is off the table. Every time someone asks me, like, which direction are you going? It's like, well, we're always looking into all directions. That's my job. That's what I spend 95% of my time focused on. But right now, we think we have a unique opportunity as the last private trucking company in this space that can be really strategic for investors, specifically investors who focus on private companies only. And we're seeing a lot of benefit from that at the moment. If you just look back 4 or 5 months, it was a much different landscape if you're a private investor. So I think there's no immediate need for such a significant move from Kodiak's perspective, but we will continue to evaluate what the best path forward is for us. And we will, always be looking to take the path that gives us the highest chance of succeeding in the long run.
As an investor and a friend of the industry, thank you for not doing a SPAC. I mean, there was the Bloomberg Business Week headline SPAC attack, and we're seeing the SPACs crumble. And autonomy is not a one-size-fits-all for trucking. The Too Simple IPO validated what's going on because it'll lift all boats.
That's right.
And there's enough cargo to go around, and we have to have a competitive industry. And you made a probably a difficult decision when somebody's dangling a very large check at you and says, hey, Don, here's a get rich overnight. We're going to give you a SPAC. And you made the decision, no, let's not take the easy money, because as we're seeing now, the pipes aren't filling up and the redemptions are coming in. And now you got problems, and you made the critical decision to stay private, which will reward you. And if you look at the private markets, Cargill is one of the largest private corporations in the world. They never went public. They're doing incredible. Koch Industries, they're private. There's a lot of great opportunities to do well for shareholders and employees by still staying private. So again, thank you for not doing a SPAC and doing right by the industry. I commend you on that.
Well, thank you. Anything for you, Grayson. We definitely had you in mind as we were making these decisions.
Thank you, because if you did a SPAC, somebody in your team would have gotten a phone call. Hey, I don't think that's a good idea. I want to jump back to the research reports, and you mentioned the JP Morgan one, and there was an analyst wrote the following there that really stood out to me. The company is also utilizing mirror pods instead of the unibrow of sensors across the top of the cab. The practical benefits of the design could be significant if they allow for faster and easier collaboration and repairs, along with easier installation. I saw the photos you released of your Gen 4 truck, and I was talking to Dan on your team. I said, wait a second, this thing's sexy. This thing looks cool. And then I read the analyst report, and I see this. Could you please kindly talk about the mirror pod approach and what's all the cool gizmo tech that's in there?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the compliment. Our hardware team has worked extremely hard on that, and I'm sure they will be thrilled to hear you say that. Ultimately, reliability and scalability flow directly from simplicity. And the best hardware modifications should be barely visible. That's our philosophy. And our patent pending mirror pods are a key component to our modular perception system design, because our system doesn't require specialized sensor calibration. And this leads to easy upfitting and easy repair. So one of the key questions that most people don't think about at this stage in terms of scaling the autonomous business, everybody's asking, okay, does the technology work? Is it safe? And can you build enough of them? Well, what about maintaining the ones that are actually being built, right? How do you repair them in the field, particularly on the road when you may be hundreds of miles from the nearest AV qualified technician, right? I don't imagine that in the fairly near term, you're going to have qualified technicians scattered throughout the country who are qualified to open up and repair the AV components. Imagine that you have a sensor that malfunctions or a camera that dies, it needs to be replaced. And so the question that we've been thinking about from the beginning, of course, is how do we address that? Because as we talk to fleets and the carriers, they immediately jump to the operational challenges within the trucking industry. I think the way that the traditional industry thinks is really all about efficiency. How do I keep my trucks moving? That is the question they ask themselves day in and day out. It's not about technology. It's about how do we keep our trucks moving? And as we transition and add autonomous vehicles to the overall fleet, we need to address that concern. If we want to work with partners to deploy our Kodiak driver, we need to convince them that these are going to be field repairable units, because otherwise their trucks don't move. And if their trucks don't move, the trucks don't make money. And so in thinking about that, we wanted to create a very modular system that could be easily repaired or replaced out in the field by a non-skilled technician. And so one of the ways that we're addressing that is through our mirror pod solution. Now, I already mentioned about why the mirror pod works well for our perception, for the technology, but think about this. We can build sub-assemblies that have almost every component of our system in our own factory, and we can pre-calibrate that pod. And then we can ship those pods to facilities and have them standing by all over the country. And then if there's an issue with a truck that's out in the field, comes in the facility, it's literally 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pull off the pod, unplug the cable, replug in the new cable, 4 bolts, new pods on, and the truck goes out the door. When you think about the turnaround time, the uptime, and the maintenance and serviceability at scale, we believe that that type of design is absolutely game changing. And we think that Kodiak's approach here is going to lead to significant advantages when we get to the point of actually scaling the technology. So that's really where that's coming from. We also think that it's great to have the technology blend into the truck itself. We are not trying to create a Frankenstein vehicle that looks and feels bulky and complex. We want it to be seamless and simple so that people on passing by these trucks don't even think twice. They don't even blink. They don't even notice that this is an autonomous vehicle going by them.
It's like changing a tire. It just goes in, boop, boop, and away you go.
Funny enough, the lug nuts on these tires are actually much more difficult to remove and replace, and there's many more of them per tire than for our Kodiak mirror pods. So yeah, it's easier than changing a tire.
Okay, now I'm really interested. Will these be placed at strategic locations? So we talked about Dallas, talked about Houston. Say, okay, we'll have a couple here, a couple there. So if there is an incident, if a rock or something, they can just, all your strategic locations, you'll have these in storage essentially just to plop them on so you have zero downtime?
Exactly. That's the plan right now. And we're working with our partners to figure out exactly operationally, what do we need to do? What is the inventory that we need to keep? What are the locations that we need to keep that inventory in? Where are the warehouses? Where are the repair facilities? What are the routes that we're driving? These are all questions that we're actively in the process of answering and we'll be answering over the next couple of years. And so I don't have specifics today, but we do know that this is the general approach that exists in the industry already. You have spare tires and you have spare mirrors, as an example, at your facilities, and you're ready to swap them out if there's damage or something that happens to those components. And so we imagine mirroring what the existing industry already does today as we roll it out. And again, when we talk to our partners, that's one of the first questions that they ask us. Okay, great. Sure. This technology, it sounds like magic. Let's assume it happens. How do I run my fleet? What about when it breaks? So we're just trying to answer those questions. And we've gotten a really, really positive reception from partners and customers that we talk to and kind of walk them through the way we're thinking about this at scale and how it will affect their business for the better.
Scale is key. It's smart. It's simple. I mean, the technician could understand how to put them on with relative ease. I'm assuming the downtime is very minimal. You said it's easier than changing a tire, so I'm assuming it's less downtime to put a pod on then.
Yep. And I can tell you anecdotal story. We actually had, our truck was parked and off. I want to make that very clear. At a distribution center, we were getting loaded up. Our trailer was getting loaded up. And another vehicle came and backed into our mirror pod and damaged it. And this was with the third generation of our mirror pod at the time. And so the driver, the safety driver, after picking up the load, brought the truck back to our facility. This was in the late afternoon of that time. And we popped a new mirror pod in and the truck was ready to go in the morning. So this wasn't quite a 15-minute turnaround, but we didn't have another load that we were picking up that day. So the truck wasn't going back out anyway. But we were able to get the truck back up and running and ready for service to pick up another commercial load in autonomy the very next morning. So we're already in our very small fleet demonstrating the importance of this modularity and the serviceability. And we think that we can replicate that at scale.
Well, there's no doubt in my mind you could replicate it at scale. It makes so much sense. It's like if you got a little kid playing Legos, you take the green block off, you put the blue block on, and away you go. But in your case, it'd be a red block because it's the Kodiak red.
That's right.
What other improvements are there on the Gen 4 truck? I know there's a Luminar LiDAR on the top. There's a ZF4D radar on that truck. What other improvements are on the Generation 4 truck?
So our Generation 4 truck features a modular design, as I mentioned before, really discrete sensor suite. So we try to move in a direction that hides a lot more of the sensors from being exposed to the outer elements and keep them out of view. We move to a much slimmer profile center pod. So we do still have a few sensors on the center of the truck. And we're thinking about how to make that just as modular. And I'll have more information on that in the future. And then, of course, we have the pods that are integrated onto both sides of the mirrors. And the components on the truck, we have a ZF full range radar. This is a unique 4D, as they say, 4D radar that has the ability to measure velocities of all the objects around it and the elevation. So that's that fourth dimension, which is the elevation, which traditional automotive radar doesn't offer. Of course, we use Luminar's Iris LiDAR, which is their new upcoming LiDAR that's going to be prominently featured in our 4th gen truck. We have Hesai's 360-degree scanning LiDARs on the sides for side and rear view detection. Cummins X15 series engine that allows us to autonomously control the safety and reliability and securely communicate with the engine. And then, of course, we announced a partnership with Bridgestone just a few months ago where we're using their smart sensing tire technology to develop really sophisticated wear and preventative maintenance algorithms for tires. And then, of course, we have the NVIDIA Drive platform. That all of those components are key components that are going to really propel our 4th generation truck into the position that we're really ready to launch a driverless vehicle.
Smart tires, that's going to be something to watch both on the commercial fleet side for your trucking, but I also think it's going to be on the robotaxi and the human-driven side. I'm really bullish on smart tire technology and the positive impacts it's going to have, especially when you're operating autonomously. You can know all tires low on air, the treads of this. It's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, well, it goes even further than that. I'm really excited about this because, as you say, this is one of the few examples of technology that we get to have a major impact on developing that will be more broadly used than just in the AV market, right? This smart tire technology is going to be used, as you said, across the entire industry. It's going to benefit human-driven fleets. It's going to benefit the current carriers out there today, and anybody who has a truck and most likely a car as well. And that's really exciting to me. The other immediate benefit of this AV technology with the smart tire sensing is we have the ability to provide data about how the truck is being driven. Traditionally, you have telematics data, which tells you kind of the GPS track of the truck, where it was driven. You can monitor the temperature and the pressures today. Those types of sensors exist. But the key missing ingredient is how is the truck being driven? What are the forces being applied to the tires? Up until now, that's really not something that they've been able to measure. And with the AV system, obviously, because the computer is making the decisions about how the truck should be driven, we can record those decisions. And then we can use that along with the traditional sensing data to produce significantly better models about how the tires are being used, how long they're expected to live, what are the different wear patterns, and allow us to improve the efficiency of preventative maintenance on the tires.
Which, putting it all together, it's going to save you money and it's going to save your customers money.
That's right.
The 4D radar, we touched on it briefly, but that's becoming a big trend. There's a big article in the Wall Street Journal. I was speaking to a couple of reporters this week. What do you know about 4D radar? So wait a second. So you're operating with 4D radar. I'm getting phone calls about 4D radar. I'd love to know, what are your thoughts on 4D radar?
Yeah, it's a really exciting technology. Radars have been around for a long time in vehicles. I don't know if it goes all the way back to the 90s, but the initial adaptive cruise control was really enabled with what we now call traditional automotive radar technology. And of course, the military has been working on radar for a very long time, and that has trickled down into the consumer market. And radars are fantastic technology because it not only tells you where things are, but it tells you how they're moving. Radar gives you the ability to measure velocity, and direct measurements of velocity is really valuable to an autonomous vehicle system. The problem is that traditional radars cannot measure the vertical position of an object. So you can't tell whether they are on the ground, whether they're 10 feet in the air, whether they're on the overpass that you're about to go past, whether they are the bridge themselves. So traditional radars have trouble for objects under and around bridges and anywhere where there's other vertical ambiguity. 4D radar is critical for autonomous trucks because it allows the system to distinguish those overhead objects. It was kind of the missing ingredient, if you will, and unleashing the full power and capability of radar. So now we can distinguish things like road signs and bridges, from road hazards like stopped vehicles under a bridge or an overhead sign, whereas previously those targets would have looked identical. And then you have to use other modes of observation to distinguish them and separate them out. But now the radar actually has the capability to do that in its own right. And that's really important because you want to have the most strength from each of your different sensing modalities. Radar is in itself an incredibly powerful sensor, especially these 4D radars. Of course, LiDAR gives you a view of where things are around you with a lot of high detail. And then cameras give you the color and texture and everything that humans are used to seeing. And each one of those sensors has its own unique strengths, and being able to exploit those strengths individually as well as combined is really what gives self-driving vehicles the redundancy that we need in our perception systems to really have an accurate view of the environment around us.
Well, let me ask you simple. Let's put this in simple terms. You have an autonomous truck going near a bridge. Can it tell the clearance needed to get under that bridge? Is that one of the benefits of 4D radar, or under a railroad track, for example?
So radar is not going to give you the accuracy that you're going to want to make a distinction about how much clearance you have under a bridge. It will tell you that there's a bridge up there and that there's a car down on the ground, but it doesn't have the resolution required to measure in inches, let's say, how tall an overpass is. This is something that we can handle with LiDAR. So LiDAR does give us a very accurate three-dimensional view of the world. It just has some limitations when you encounter, for instance, rain. LiDAR doesn't particularly perform well in rainy conditions or really foggy conditions, whereas radar works in those environments extremely well. So measuring the clearance under a bridge is not one of the core functionalities that we particularly focus on, and not at this stage anyway, because on the interstate highway system, we know what the clearances are. And also the routes that we drive autonomously are routes that we have driven and mapped previously. And so we know what the clearances are from those mapping runs. And we can look up that information in our database that tells us, okay, we have the clearance to go into under those underpasses. But obviously, as we push further and further into all roads and push the technology to its limits, then that will become a very important problem. I think the LiDAR, at the speeds you need to make a decision as to whether to go or stop, LiDAR will be able to very accurately measure what the clearance is in front of the vehicle. And so I'm not worried about that problem.
You'll solve it. When you get there, you'll solve it. And that's the benefit of the full stack, of using all the different components that are available to you. And you never know, somebody could invent something that could measure bridges for all we know. We've got a lot of very smart, talented people in your company. As you prepare to commercialize Kodiak, how will the Kodiak Express and Kodiak driver service impact your growth?
Our customer offerings are a key component to our growth. And there are going to be multiple ways for organizations to work with us. Currently, while we validate our tech and prove out the safety case, we are hauling goods for customers using our autonomous fleet. This is what we call Kodiak Express. And we're going to continue to offer this service into the future as we both work on the research and development, expand our service operation domain, so geographically expand to new routes, and continue to move freight with our customers. Once the safety case is proven out, we're also going to offer technology as a subscription. And this is where customers can run the Kodiak driver technology on the trucks that they own specifically.
So you're taking both approaches. You're kind of hedging to see where the business and where the market's going to take you?
That's right, for now. But I want to stress that we really feel like becoming a tech provider and providing this technology as a subscription service is very much the focus of our long-term strategy. We will always maintain our own fleet to continue with pushing the boundaries of the technology, developing new generations of the hardware and new generations of the software. But I think in the long run, it will be incumbent upon us to work with industry players, current carriers, current private fleets out there to deploy the Kodiak driver technology at scale on their own fleets.
That raises the question, do you think of Kodiak more of a technology company or more of a trucking company?
That's an interesting one. So, at the end of the day, I think we are most definitely a technology company. Obviously, we have very close roots to the trucking company. We have a lot of trucking DNA. We hire truckers. We work on a trucking platform. Trucking runs through us, and we really identify with the trucking industry. And we feel more welcome than ever because we have such great partners and we have a mutual respect for those partners and customers, and explain to them very clearly and concisely what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what the benefits and advantages are. And so when you feel very welcomed by an industry, it's hard not to feel a very close affinity with that industry. At the end of the day, though, Kodiak is developing technology. We're primarily a technology company. I think we're a technology-enabled trucking company is a good way to say it. So it's hard to choose. It's like I have two children and you're asking me to choose a favorite. It's very difficult to do. But I'd say I have to think of us as a technology company, first and foremost, one that is very specifically focused on the trucking industry.
Well, tech companies get better multiples, so I'll give you that one.
Absolutely.
So it's interesting. I view you as a supply chain company. I think a supply chain logistics company. I think this whole industry is supply chain logistics, and I think that's where this is going to come from. You throw tech on that, now you're interesting. I live in Florida. You're from Florida. I want autonomous trucking to come to Florida. I called you guys when you were at Auto in Beverly Hills trying to get you to automate dump trucks. So here we are. When can we expect Kodiak trucks in Florida?
Absolutely. Florida is near and dear to my heart. My parents ask me the same question, actually, pretty frequently. They're like, hey, you should bring your business to Florida. You'll be closer to home. I think the answer is we'll get there eventually. It's not our first immediate target. But as I've mentioned in the past, we are expanding into the southern half of the United States. That's part of our plan, and we want to move coast to coast. And right now, our operations are built around Dallas-Fort Worth. We have a deployment hub there, but we will be expanding west from Dallas, moving toward Arizona, moving toward LA, and we will be expanding east, moving toward Atlanta, moving down into Tallahassee, out to Jacksonville and I-10. So I definitely think that we're going to get there. I think we'll get there hopefully in a very near time frame, but I don't have an exact time to give you.
I'll give you one piece of good advice. You should always listen to your parents because they give good advice.
Absolutely.
Don, putting this wonderful conversation into context, what is the future of Kodiak?
Well, where we stand today, we believe that we have the best tech in the autonomous trucking industry. And I think we're now finally able to demonstrate that to a broad audience, which is very, very exciting. And over the next few years, we are going to be working to increase the Kodiak driver's redundancy. Redundancy is, I think, the single most important word when it comes to deploying self-driving vehicles. You need redundancy throughout your entire system, on the sensing side, on the hardware side, the compute side, the networking side, the actuation side, and the software side. Redundancy throughout the system. You need reliability. You need it to be very robust. You need it to last. And we're going to be working to increase all of those to ensure that we can handle even the most complex scenarios that we see over the road. And what we're working on today is building out our safety case. It's a comprehensive evaluation that proves that the Kodiak driver is safer than the average truck driver. And this analysis will depend on a number of different factors, from high-level statistical benchmarking to simulation testing to functional safety analysis. And once testing and validation is complete, then driverless trucks will be out on the road. And we think that will happen most likely in the next few years. And I would say lastly, we're working to build our fleet and our operations so that we can begin to serve customers with the technology we have today across the southern half of the US.
Redundancy builds trust. It builds trust with the public when they understand that you have redundant systems. It builds trust with policymakers when they understand that you have redundant systems. Redundancy, as you stated, is the key to truly scaling this technology, because without the trust of the technology, there is no industry. And as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
First and foremost, I would say the technology is closer than most people think. Maybe not your listeners, but most people. And it's really a matter of when, not if it's going to happen, which I think is a very exciting thing, because that's not always been the case in the self-driving space. And one thing that I'm most proud of at Kodiak is how much we've achieved in such a short amount of time and with far less capital than what others have used. So we've taken an approach of being a lot leaner, a lot lighter, and this is the kind of progress that only comes from having a super experienced and an incredibly talented team. And I'm super proud of the team that we have and all the work that they've done over the last 3.5 years. I believe that Kodiak Robotics is the most capital efficient company in all of autonomous driving. And that's something that we think is really going to define the success over the next several years. It's not just about building the right technology, but it's also about being efficient with your resources, especially when we're in such a capital intensive industry. And so those, I think, are the thoughts that I would leave.
Well, we have a lot of bankers that listen that are subscribers. So capital efficiency is key. If you can lower your burn rate, increase your profits, you've got very happy bankers and very happy investors. And Don, I thank you so much for coming on the Road to Autonomy today, because the future's bright, the future's autonomous, and the future is Kodiak Robotics. And Don, keep on trucking, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter at Road to Autonomy, or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.